You're not anxious because bad things are happening. You're anxious because of what you think might happen. And there's a 2,300-year-old distinction that changes everything about how you deal with that. In ancient Greece, when philosophy was less a subject you studied, and more a medicine you took for the actual problems of being alive, Epicurus built a small community outside Athens, and spent decades teaching people how to stop suffering from things that hadn't happened yet. His students came to him exhausted. Not from poverty or illness, though some had those too. From worry, from the relentless low-level dread of a mind that could always find something threatening on the horizon. He had an answer that was so simple his critics accused him of being shallow. They were wrong. They just hadn't sat with it long enough. The world Epicurus moved through was genuinely uncertain. Disease came without warning. Political power shifted without notice. Wealth could vanish in a season. The standard response to all of this uncertainty was either religious supplication, trying to appease whatever forces controlled fate, or Stoic resignation, accepting that suffering was unavoidable and training yourself not to care. Both approaches had merit. Both also left something important unaddressed. They assumed that anxiety was a reasonable response to an uncertain world, that the fear was appropriate to the actual level of danger. Epicurus looked at this and disagreed. Quietly, patiently, persistently. We have a different vocabulary for the same problem now. We call it catastrophizing, or health anxiety, or doom scrolling, or just general stress. The mechanism is identical. The mind takes an uncertain future and fills it with its worst available scenario, then responds emotionally to that invented scenario as if it were already real. Sound familiar? So what did he actually see that made him so unusually calm? He started from a place that felt radical then and still feels slightly uncomfortable now. He said the sources of genuine suffering are actually quite limited. Pain, loss, death, and most of what people experience as suffering is not from those things but from the anticipation of those things, which is a mental event, not a physical one, and therefore a mental problem with a mental solution. This is not the same as saying nothing bad is real, or that you should pretend problems don't exist. He was precise about this. He said, divide every worry into two categories: things that are within your power to address, and things that are not. For the first category, act. Stop thinking and do the thing you can do. For the second category, the things genuinely outside your reach, the analysis is different. And here is where the philosophy gets specific enough to actually use. For unavoidable uncertainties, he asked one question that cuts through anxiety faster than almost anything else. If the worst outcome happened, could you survive it? Not thrive, not enjoy it, just survive it. And if yes, what exactly are you afraid of? This forces the mind to do something it instinctively resists. It forces you to look directly at the thing you've been circling. Most anxiety lives in the space between the worry and the actual feared outcome. The mind catches a glimpse of something threatening, and then refuses to look at it fully, which means the threat stays permanently in peripheral vision, looming, never resolved. Epicurus said, turn and face it. Describe it precisely. What is the actual worst case? How bad is that really? 9 times out of 10, when people do this honestly, the worst case is genuinely survivable. And something shifts when you know that there's a second principle he kept returning to, and it's the one most people in his tradition underemphasize. He said the primary source of anxiety for most people is not fear of pain. It is desire for things they don't have and fear of losing things they do. The mind gets locked in a perpetual gap between current reality and imagined ideal. That gap generates constant low-level suffering, regardless of what's actually happening. You can be objectively comfortable and still miserable if your reference point is something you don't have. His prescription was not to want less in a defeated, resigned way. It was something more active and more interesting. He called it appreciating what is already present. Not gratitude as a performance, not positivity as a habit you maintain through effort, but genuine attention to the texture of what's actually available to you right now. The food in front of you, the person beside you, the absence of the specific pain you've been fearing. He noticed that when people were actually in the middle of what they'd feared, they often found it manageable. The anticipation was worse than the event. The anxiety before the difficult conversation was worse than the conversation. The dread before the medical appointment was worse than the appointment. The mind at rest in the present moment suffered less than the mind projected into an imagined future. But here is where it connects to something you're probably experiencing right now. You have a version of this running continuously, a background process that never fully shuts off. Maybe it's about money, whether there'll be enough, whether you're making the right decisions with what you have. Maybe it's about a relationship, and whether it's as solid as it looks, or whether something is quietly wrong. Maybe it's health, and every unusual sensation becomes a possible symptom of something serious. The specific content varies. The structure is the same. Mind grabs a possible future threat and holds onto it. What Epicurus would say is that you're not experiencing those threats. You're experiencing your thoughts about those threats. And thoughts, unlike real threats, respond to examination. The practice he taught was almost embarrassingly direct. When the anxious thought arrives, ask, "Is this happening now?" If no, ask, "Is there anything I can do about this right now?" If no, the mind has no legitimate work to do here. Its concern is noted. Its analysis is not currently required. You can return to it when it becomes actionable. This sounds simple. It is simple. It requires repetition before it becomes natural, because the anxious mind treats every threat as urgent, regardless of timeline, and you're essentially training a different response to that urgency signal. Not suppressing it, not arguing with it, just redirecting it toward the present, which is the only place anything can actually be addressed. He lived this. He had chronic physical pain for much of his life, and by most accounts remained genuinely cheerful. Not because he was pretending or because he'd numbed himself to his situation. Because he had trained himself to find the actual good that was present rather than focusing exclusively on what was absent or threatened. The part most people find hardest is this: anxiety feels productive. It feels like you're working on the problem. You're thinking about it, turning it over, preparing for it. But anxiety about an uncontrollable future is not preparation. It is rehearsal for suffering that may never arrive. And the cost of that rehearsal is the quality of the present moment you're reliving in while you perform it. He gave us a simple test for any worry. Is this thought helping me act? If yes, act. If no, it's not a thought about a problem. It's a problem in itself. The ancient world had genuine threats he couldn't control. He was calm anyway. You have the same tool he had. The only question is whether you're willing to use it. Subscribe if this gave you something real. The next video looks at another thinker who built on exactly this idea and took it somewhere unexpected.